My sister insisted I watch her 4 kids on New Year's Eve while they happily enjoyed the vacation I was funding. My parents took her side, so I scrapped all the travel plans and simply watched them go ballistic. I just wanted to celebrate my parents' 40th anniversary. Instead, I found myself facing a choice that would cost me $12,000, shatter my family, and force me to finally choose myself. The phone rang, cutting through the late evening silence of my apartment in Chicago, where I was just finishing up some work. I picked it up, completely unaware that the call on the other end was about to ignite a firestorm I'd been suppressing for years. Let me back up a little. I'm 32, a senior financial analyst at a corporate firm. I've been there 8 years, clawing my way up from entry level, and honestly, I'm proud of the life I've built. I have my own cozy apartment, a dependable car, and I've been diligently saving since college. It's a quiet, stable life. My sister, Ashley, is 36, and her life? It's a complete contrast. She married her high school sweetheart, James, at 23. They have 4 kids, Caleb, who just turned 12, Sophia, 10, and the 7-year-old twins, Liam and Chloe. A full house, to say the least. Ashley was always the golden child. The beautiful one, the popular one, the daughter who made mom and dad beam with pride at every event. Me? I was the quiet one, tucked away with my books, good grades but never quite shining like she did. Our mother, Susan, never tried to hide her favoritism, and my father, Robert, just went along with whatever kept the peace. That dynamic, that unspoken pecking order, it shaped every major moment of my adult life. I've spent years in therapy just trying to untangle the mess it left behind. The whole me funding family vacations thing started about 5 years ago, though the groundwork for it was laid much earlier. Ashley and James were in a rough financial patch. He's a sales rep for a medical equipment company, so his income could fluctuate wildly with commissions. Ashley works part-time as a dental receptionist, mostly for the insurance. When their money took a nosedive, I offered to pay for a family trip to California so the kids could experience a theme park. I genuinely thought it was a one-time gesture of love. It wasn't. It became an expectation. Every year since then, I funded increasingly elaborate family vacations, a cruise to Mexico, a week skiing in Utah, a road trip through Texas that cost me almost $9,000 when all was said and done. Each time, I told myself, it's for the kids, for the family memories, to see everyone happy. And each time, Ashley accepted my generosity without so much as a genuine thank you. My parents? They'd praise Ashley for being such a wonderful mother, barely acknowledging my contribution. This year, I planned something truly special. My parents were approaching their 40th wedding anniversary, and I wanted to do something meaningful. I spent months researching and found this beautiful resort in Asheville, North Carolina, known for its stunning mountains and luxurious spa. I booked 2 connecting suites, enough room for everyone, for just over $12,000. It was a 5-night stay, spanning New Year's Eve and the first few days of January. I paid for everything up front, because that's what holiday bookings required. What nobody in my family seemed to grasp was the sheer work that went into these trips. They saw the glossy itineraries, the confirmed reservations. They never saw the hours I spent comparing prices, reading reviews, coordinating schedules, handling every single logistic. For the Utah ski trip alone, I spent 3 weeks researching ski schools for kids of different ages, called the resort multiple times about equipment rentals for 4-year-olds, arranged airport transport, booked kid-friendly restaurant reservations, and even bought hand warmers in bulk because I knew kids always complained about cold fingers. All this invisible labor was just expected. When something went right, it was the natural order of things. When something went wrong, like the time Caleb got food poisoning from a seafood restaurant I'd chosen, I bore the brunt of the blame, despite having zero control over kitchen hygiene. My best friend, Sarah, once asked me why I kept doing it. We were having lunch, and I was venting about the Texas road trip. I remember staring at my salad, genuinely struggling to articulate an answer. The best I could come up with was, I just want to feel like part of the family, like I belong. Sarah looked at me with such profound sadness that I had to change the subject. The Asheville trip felt different, though. It wasn't just another vacation funded out of guilt. My parents' 40th anniversary genuinely mattered to me. I wanted to create something truly memorable for them. I spent nearly 2 months researching destinations before settling on North Carolina. I watched YouTube videos of the resort, joined online forums for insider tips. This attention to detail felt like an act of love, not an obligation, and that distinction was vital. I presented the trip to my family at Thanksgiving. Everyone was at my parents' house. I had made a little presentation with photos of the resort, the spa, hiking trails, all the activities for the kids. I watched Mom's face, Susan's face, light up as I described the anniversary dinner I'd arranged. Dad, Robert, actually teared up a little, which meant more to me than I can express. The kids were thrilled about the pool and junior ranger programs. Even James seemed genuinely pleased. Ashley's reaction was more subdued, but I chalked it up to holiday chaos. She thanked me briefly, then pivoted the conversation to Caleb's latest basketball game. I told myself not to read into it, not to let my insecurities ruin what should have been a happy moment. The real problem started 2 weeks before we were supposed to leave. Though, looking back, there were smaller warning signs I'd chosen to ignore. A few days after Thanksgiving, Ashley had posted on social media about needing a break from mommy duties. Her friends flooded the comments with sympathy. I'd scrolled past it, assuming it was just typical venting. Then James made an offhand comment in a family group text about how nice it would be to have some adult time during the trip. I'd sent a smiley emoji, thinking he meant evening dinners after the kids were asleep. The first real sign of trouble came when Susan, my mother, mentioned almost casually that Ashley had been researching upscale restaurants in Asheville. This was during a phone call about something completely unrelated. She dropped the information like it was innocuous. When I asked why Ashley was researching restaurants when I'd already arranged our dining, Susan just laughed and said something about Ashley wanting options. I should have pressed harder. I should have demanded clarity. Instead, I did what I always did with my family. I assumed the best and hoped any conflict would resolve itself. Ashley called me on a Tuesday evening while I was finishing work. Her voice had that particular tone I've come to recognize over the years, the one that means she wants something and expects me to provide it. She explained that she and James had been talking. They felt the trip would be the perfect opportunity for them to have some alone time. They wanted to ring in the new year as a couple, just the two of them, without the chaos of 4 children. They found a fancy restaurant in Asheville that offered a special New Year's Eve tasting menu, and they wanted a real date night. I said that sounded lovely and asked what their plan was for the kids. That's when she dropped it on me. She wanted me to babysit all 4 children on New Year's Eve so she and James could have their romantic dinner. Not just for a few hours, but for the entire evening and night. They wanted to get a separate hotel room somewhere else so they could have privacy, which meant I'd be responsible for the kids from late afternoon until the following morning. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what she was asking. I was paying over $12,000 for this trip. I had planned special activities for myself, too, including a sunset meditation session on New Year's Eve that I'd been looking forward to for months. The resort had a gorgeous outdoor gathering space where they did a champagne toast at midnight. I'd imagined standing there under the North Carolina stars, feeling hopeful about the year ahead. Instead, my sister wanted me to spend New Year's Eve wrangling her 4 children while she and her husband enjoyed a romantic evening on my dime. I told her I needed to think about it. She immediately got defensive. She reminded me that I didn't have kids, that I didn't understand how exhausting parenting was, that she and James desperately needed this time together. Then she pointed out that I was single and didn't have any romantic plans anyway. So, what difference did it make how I spent New Year's Eve? That comment stung more than I wanted to admit. I've been single for 3 years, not because I'm unlovable, but because I've chosen to focus on myself and my healing. My last relationship ended badly, and I've been intentional about not rushing into something new just to fill a void. Ashley knows this. She's used it against me before. Subtle jabs about my empty apartment and my solo vacations, always delivered with a pitying smile that made me want to scream. What made the comment even more painful was the unspoken assumption beneath it: in Ashley's worldview, my life had less value because I didn't have a husband or children. My career accomplishments, my friendships, my personal growth, none of that registered as meaningful. I existed primarily as a resource to be utilized by those whose lives supposedly mattered more. I thought about all the New Year's Eves I'd spent with my family over the years. The midnight toasts where I stood slightly apart from the couples. The way my mother would squeeze Robert's hand and look at Ashley and James with such warmth, while barely acknowledging me. The kids' bedtimes that always seemed to interrupt whatever plans I might have had. Year after year, I'd shown up, participated, and tried to find joy in their celebration while my own desires faded into the background. For once, I'd imagined something different. The sunset meditation session at the resort had seemed like such a perfect way to close out a difficult year. I pictured myself surrounded by the mountains as the sky turned orange and pink, breathing deeply and setting intentions. The champagne toast at midnight had represented a small act of self-celebration, a chance to acknowledge my own journey. Ashley wanted me to trade all of that for diapers and bedtime negotiations and the particular chaos that 4 children under 13 could generate. I told her again that I needed time to consider her request and ended the call. The next morning, I woke up to a text from my mother, Susan, asking me to call her. When I did, she launched into a lecture about family obligations and sisterly love. Ashley had already gotten to her, framing the situation as me being selfish and unwilling to help. Susan reminded me that Ashley had 4 children to raise while I had the luxury of only worrying about myself. She said that sometimes family meant sacrifice, and she hoped I would do the right thing. I asked my mother if she would be willing to watch the kids instead, since she and my father would be on the trip, too. She laughed like I'd told a joke. She explained that she and Robert were planning to enjoy the resort's amenities themselves, that they'd earned this relaxation after 40 years of marriage and raising 2 daughters. She said it wouldn't be fair to ask them to babysit when I was the one without responsibilities. I pointed out that I was the one paying for the entire trip. Susan went quiet for a moment, then told me that bringing up money was tacky and hurtful. She said she'd raised me better than that and expressed her disappointment in my attitude. She ended the call by saying she hoped I'd come to my senses before the trip. I spent the next several days feeling like I was going crazy. I talked to Sarah, my best friend, who has been my rock through years of family drama. She was appalled and encouraged me to stand my ground. We met for coffee the day after my mother's call, and Sarah listened to the entire saga with her jaw practically on the table. She pointed out something I hadn't fully articulated to myself: the request wasn't just about babysitting. It was about my family's fundamental view of my place in the hierarchy. To them, my time, my money, and my emotional energy existed to serve their needs. The idea that I might have my own desires for New Year's Eve hadn't even occurred to Ashley. She'd simply assumed I would be available because I was always available. Sarah also helped me see the financial absurdity. I was paying over $12,000 for a family vacation, and my reward for that generosity was to spend the biggest night of the trip alone with 4 children while everyone else celebrated. It would be like buying someone an expensive car and then being told I had to walk everywhere while they drove. I spoke with my therapist, Dr. Chen, who helped me recognize the manipulation tactics my family was using. She'd been working with me for 2 years, and she'd heard countless stories about my family dynamics. During our session, she asked me to imagine what I would tell a friend in the same situation. The answer came immediately: I would tell her to stand up for herself and refuse to be treated like the help. Dr. Chen also introduced a concept that shifted my perspective entirely. She called it the cycle of overfunctioning, and asked me to consider whether my constant helpfulness was actually enabling my family's dysfunction. By always stepping in to smooth things over and meet everyone's needs, I was preventing them from developing their own coping mechanisms and problem-solving skills. My generosity, well-intentioned as it was, had become a crutch that allowed them to remain dependent and entitled. I journaled extensively during those days. I went for long runs through my neighborhood, the December cold biting my cheeks as I tried to outpace my racing thoughts. I did everything I could to process my emotions and figure out my next move. A week before the trip, my father, Robert, called me. This was unusual because he rarely gets involved in family conflicts. He prefers to stay neutral, which in practice means he enables whatever Susan and Ashley decide. But this time, he reached out directly. He started by telling me how much the trip meant to him and my mother, how touched they were that I planned something so special for their anniversary. I felt a surge of warmth, thinking maybe he was calling to support me. Then he pivoted. He said he understood that watching the kids on New Year's Eve wasn't ideal, but he asked me to consider it a gift to the family. He framed it as me helping Ashley's marriage, as if their relationship was somehow my responsibility. He mentioned that James and Ashley had been having some tension lately, and that a romantic evening might be exactly what they needed to reconnect. I asked my father why Ashley's marriage was more important than my enjoyment of a trip I was entirely funding. He sighed heavily and told me I was being difficult. He said that money wasn't everything and that family should always come first. He expressed hope that I would remember what really mattered. I ended the call feeling hollow and exhausted. I spent the rest of the evening staring at my living room wall, running through scenarios in my head. I imagined caving to their demands and spending New Year's Eve surrounded by children while everyone else celebrated. I imagined the resentment festering inside me for months afterward. I imagined next year, when they'd expect something similar, and the year after that, an endless cycle of my generosity being exploited. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed watching shadows move across my ceiling, my mind replaying every family vacation I'd funded. I remembered the Mexico cruise where Ashley had complained about her cabin being too small, despite the fact that I'd upgraded everyone at significant personal expense. I remembered the Utah ski trip where Susan had criticized the resort's breakfast buffet, saying she expected better quality, given what she assumed I was paying. I remembered the Texas road trip where James had grumbled about the rental car not being spacious enough, as if he'd forgotten he hadn't contributed a single dollar to the vehicle rental. In all those years of funding elaborate vacations, nobody had asked what I wanted to do. The itineraries always revolved around the children's interests or my parents' preferences. If I suggested an activity, like visiting a museum in Houston during our Texas trip, I was met with sighs and complaints about how boring it would be. My desires were consistently outvoted or dismissed, and I'd learned to simply stop voicing them. Lying there in the darkness, I began to understand something fundamental about my role in the family. I wasn't a full participant in these vacations. I was a sponsor. My function was to provide the resources and logistics while everyone else enjoyed the experience. Asking me to babysit on New Year's Eve wasn't an aberration. It was a logical extension of how I'd always been treated. 3 days before the trip, Ashley sent me a long text message. She thanked me for agreeing to watch the kids and outlined her plans for the evening. She told me what time she and James would be leaving, what the kids' bedtimes were, which restaurants delivered to the resort if I needed to order dinner. I hadn't agreed to anything. I stared at that message for a full 10 minutes, my heart pounding in my chest. She had interpreted my silence as consent. Or maybe she'd known all along that I would eventually cave, because I always did. I was the reliable one, the accommodating one, the sister who bent over backward to keep the peace while everyone else took and took and took. Something shifted inside me in that moment. It was subtle at first, like a small crack in a dam. Then the pressure built and built until everything broke loose. I didn't respond to Ashley's text. Instead, I picked up my phone and called the resort in Asheville. I explained that I needed to cancel my reservation. The woman on the phone expressed sympathy and looked up my booking. She informed me that because I was canceling within 72 hours of the check-in date, I would forfeit my entire payment according to the resort's policy. $12,000 gone. I didn't hesitate. I confirmed the cancellation. After ending that call, I sat in my living room and cried. Not from regret, but from relief. For the first time in years, I had chosen myself. I had refused to participate in a system that treated my generosity as an obligation and my feelings as irrelevant. The physical sensation of relief surprised me with its intensity. My shoulders dropped from their habitual position near my ears. My jaw unclenched. The persistent headache that had plagued me for the past week dissolved within minutes of confirming the cancellation. My body had been holding tension I hadn't even recognized until it suddenly released. I walked through my apartment, touching familiar objects as if seeing them for the first time. The framed photograph of me at my college graduation, standing alone because my parents had left early to attend one of Ashley's events. The ceramic vase I bought myself after my first promotion, a small celebration that nobody in my family had acknowledged. The bookshelf filled with novels I loved, titles that Ashley had always dismissed as pretentious or boring. Every corner of my home represented choices I'd made for myself. And yet, I'd been willing to surrender my autonomy the moment my family demanded it. I thought about calling Sarah to tell her what I'd done, but I wasn't ready to talk yet. The decision felt too raw, too significant to share before I'd fully processed it myself. Instead, I made a cup of tea and sat by my window, watching the city lights flicker in the early evening darkness. I composed a group text to my parents and Ashley. I kept it simple and factual. I wrote that I had cancelled the Asheville trip and that I would not be providing any further explanation. I wished them all a happy new year and asked them to respect my decision. Then I turned off my phone. I left it off for 3 days. During those 3 days, I did things for myself that I'd been putting off for years. I deep cleaned my apartment, not because it was dirty, but because the physical act of clearing out clutter felt therapeutic. I donated 3 bags of clothes to a local shelter, including several items I'd kept only because Ashley had given them to me as regifted cast-offs. I cooked elaborate meals just for myself, dishes I'd always wanted to try but never made because they seemed like too much effort for one person, a complex mushroom risotto that required constant stirring, homemade pasta with a slow-simmered bolognese, a chocolate soufflé that collapsed slightly but tasted like heaven. I watched movies I loved without worrying about anyone else's preferences. I binged an entire limited series that Ashley had once mocked as melodramatic. I took long baths with expensive bath bombs I'd been hoarding for special occasions that never seemed to arrive. I slept in as late as I wanted and woke up without an alarm for the first time in months. Sarah called on the second day, worried because I hadn't responded to her messages. I finally answered and told her everything. She screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Then she laughed, a full-bodied sound of pure delight, and told me she'd never been prouder of anyone in her entire life. She offered to come over and celebrate, but I told her I needed the solitude. She understood. During those quiet days, I found myself grieving. The grief surprised me because I'd expected to feel only relief and perhaps some anxiety about the consequences. Instead, I mourned the family I'd always wanted and never quite had. I cried for the little girl who tried so hard to earn her parents' approval and the young woman who thought that generosity could purchase love. I grieved the relationship I might have had with Ashley if circumstances had been different, if our mother hadn't pitted us against each other, if I hadn't always been cast as a supporting character in my sister's story. The grief felt cleansing rather than destructive. It was the sadness of finally accepting reality after years of hoping things would change. My family would probably never give me what I needed. That recognition hurt, but it also freed me from the exhausting effort of trying to earn something that should have been given unconditionally. On New Year's Eve, I poured myself a glass of champagne at midnight and toasted to my own courage. I watched the fireworks on television and felt genuinely hopeful for the first time in longer than I could remember. When I finally turned my phone back on, I had 47 missed calls, 83 text messages, and countless voicemails. The notifications loaded slowly, a cascading wall of increasingly frantic and angry communications. Ashley's texts started confused and escalated to furious. She accused me of ruining her children's vacation, destroying her marriage, and being the most selfish person she'd ever known. She called me names I won't repeat here. She demanded that I call her immediately and fix this situation. My mother's messages were variations on disappointment and guilt. She couldn't believe I would do this to the family. She was heartbroken that I'd chosen to hurt everyone over something as trivial as babysitting. She questioned where she'd gone wrong raising me and asked how I could be so cold. My father left one voicemail, his voice tired and resigned. He said he hoped I was proud of myself and that this would take a long time to heal from. James texted me directly, which he had never done before. His message was surprisingly civil compared to the others. He acknowledged that the situation had gotten out of hand and suggested that maybe we could talk when emotions had cooled down. I appreciated his tone, but didn't respond. I also received several messages from relatives I rarely speak to. Apparently, Ashley had broadcast her version of events to the extended family, painting me as a monster who had cruelly yanked away a promised vacation days before it was supposed to happen. My Aunt Carol, who I've always found exhausting, sent me a long message about forgiveness and family bonds. My cousin Kevin sent a brief text asking if I was okay, which was the only supportive communication I received from any relative. In the weeks following New Year's, the fallout continued. Ashley stopped speaking to me entirely. When I tried to reach out a week into January to have a calm conversation, she blocked my number. She also blocked me on all social media platforms. I found out through my mother that Ashley had told her children I was no longer part of their lives. Caleb, Sophia, Liam, and Chloe, whom I had loved and spoiled for years, were now cut off from their aunt because their mother couldn't handle not getting her way. My parents invited me to dinner in mid-January under the guise of wanting to reconcile. I agreed because despite everything, I still loved them and hoped for a genuine conversation. Instead, I walked into an ambush. My mother spent the first hour of dinner detailing how much the family had been hurt by my actions. She wanted me to apologize to Ashley, to offer to pay for a makeup trip, to essentially grovel for forgiveness. I asked my mother if anyone was planning to acknowledge that I had been taken advantage of for years. She dismissed the question as dramatic and said that family helped family without keeping score. She pointed out that someday I might need help and wouldn't I want Ashley there for me? I reminded her that Ashley had never once been there for me. When I went through my difficult breakup 3 years ago, Ashley hadn't called once. When I had a cancer scare 2 years ago that thankfully turned out to be nothing, Ashley hadn't even sent a text. My generosity had always flowed one direction, and any suggestion otherwise was pure fantasy. My father tried to intervene at that point, suggesting we all take a breath. My mother was crying, insisting I was rewriting history to make myself the victim. The dinner ended with me leaving before dessert, my appetite gone, and my heart heavy. A month later, I received an email from James. He apologized for how things had escalated and admitted that the New Year's Eve request had been unreasonable. He said he'd been trying to talk to Ashley about reaching out to me, but she remained firmly entrenched in her anger. He expressed hope that time would soften things and said that for what it was worth, he appreciated the trips I'd funded over the years, even if he'd never properly thanked me. I thanked James for his email, but made it clear that I wouldn't be funding any more family vacations. I told him that my relationship with Ashley would need significant repair before I could consider rejoining family events. He responded that he understood. Spring arrived, and with it came a kind of peace I hadn't expected. Without the constant pressure of family expectations, I found myself breathing easier. I picked up hobbies I'd abandoned years ago. I joined a pottery class and discovered I had a talent for wheel throwing. I started hiking on weekends, exploring trails around Illinois I'd never known existed. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected because I'd always been too busy managing family dynamics. Sarah threw me a small celebration in March, 6 months before my 33rd birthday, just because she wanted to acknowledge the changes I'd made. We gathered at her apartment with a few close friends, eating homemade pasta and drinking good wine. Someone asked me about my family, and for the first time, I could talk about the situation without feeling like I was going to cry or explode. Dr. Chen told me during one of our sessions that what I'd done took tremendous courage. She said that people who grow up in dysfunctional families often struggle their entire lives to break free from harmful patterns. By canceling that trip, I had drawn a boundary that should have been drawn years ago. The financial loss was significant, but the emotional freedom I gained was invaluable. Summer brought unexpected contact from my nieces and nephews. Caleb somehow found my email address and sent me a message asking why I didn't come around anymore. My heart broke reading his words. He was 12 years old and confused about why his aunt had apparently abandoned him. I wrote back carefully, telling him that I loved him and his siblings very much, but that adult disagreements sometimes meant people needed space. I told him that none of this was his fault and that I hoped we could see each other again someday. Ashley found out about the email exchange and sent me a blistering message through a new number. She accused me of trying to turn her children against her and demanded that I never contact them again. I didn't respond, but I saved every message in case I ever needed documentation of her behavior. My parents made another attempt at reconciliation in August. This time, through my Aunt Carol, who called me claiming to be neutral. She suggested a family meeting where everyone could air their grievances and work toward healing. I asked who was organizing this meeting and learned it was my mother. I asked if Ashley had agreed to participate, and Aunt Carol admitted she wasn't sure. I politely declined the invitation and suggested that any genuine reconciliation would need to start with acknowledgement of how I'd been treated, not another session of me being lectured about family obligations. As autumn arrived, I began to feel genuinely content with my decision. The pain of losing my sister and the complicated grief of estrangement from my parents had faded into something more manageable. I still loved my family. I still hoped that someday we might find our way back to each other. But I no longer felt responsible for making that happen at the expense of my own well-being. My 33rd birthday came in September, and I celebrated by taking myself on a solo trip to Denver, Colorado. I'd always wanted to visit, and without family obligations eating into my vacation budget, I could finally afford to explore somewhere new. I wandered through bookstores and coffee shops, hiked in Forest Park, and ate incredible food. I rang in my birthday at a rooftop bar, watching the sunset, surrounded by strangers, but feeling more whole than I had in years. One night during that trip, I wrote a letter to my younger self. I told her that she was worthy of love and respect. I told her that being helpful and generous were beautiful qualities, but not when they came at the cost of her own dignity. I told her that setting boundaries wasn't selfish and that the people who truly loved her would respect those boundaries rather than rage against them. When I got home from Denver, I found a card in my mailbox. It was from Sophia, my 10-year-old niece. She'd drawn a picture of us together at the California theme park, back when I'd first started funding the family trips. At the bottom, in her careful handwriting, she'd written that she missed me and hoped I would come back soon. I cried for an hour after reading that card. Then, I put it in a special box where I keep meaningful mementos and tried to hold on to hope that someday, when those kids were older, they would understand. The holidays approached again, and I braced myself for whatever chaos might come. My mother reached out in early December, her tone softer than it had been all year. She said she missed me and wanted me to come to Christmas dinner. She promised that Ashley would be civil and that no one would bring up the incident. I asked my mother if she had thought about why I canceled the trip in the first place. There was a long pause before she answered. She admitted that she'd been reflecting on things and could see how the situation might have seemed unfair from my perspective. It wasn't the full acknowledgement I needed, but it was more than I'd expected. I told her I would think about Christmas. In the end, I decided not to go, not because I was holding a grudge, but because I knew I wasn't ready. Walking into that house, facing Ashley's resentment and my parents' complicated feelings, would undo months of healing. Maybe next year, I told myself, maybe by then we'd all have grown enough to try again. I spent Christmas with Sarah and her family instead. They welcomed me warmly, treated me like one of their own, and reminded me what healthy family dynamics could look like. Sarah's mother asked about my pottery and seemed genuinely interested in my answers. Her father challenged me to a board game and laughed when I beat him. Her younger brother teased me about my hiking obsession and promised to join me on a trail in the spring. This New Year's Eve, one full year after everything fell apart, I stood on my balcony at midnight and watched distant fireworks scatter across the Chicago skyline. I thought about the person I was 12 months ago, the woman who had always put others first and considered her own needs secondary. I thought about the $12,000 I'd lost, a significant amount that still made me wince. I thought about my sister and my parents and my nieces and nephews, all the complicated threads of love and disappointment that made up my family. Most of all, I thought about what I gained. I gained my self-respect. I gained clarity about my worth. I gained the understanding that generosity should come from joy, not obligation, and that people who truly appreciate you never make you feel guilty for having needs of your own. I gained a year of growth and healing that wouldn't have been possible if I'd spent another New Year's Eve babysitting while my sister enjoyed a romantic dinner on my dime. Ashley still hasn't spoken to me. My parents maintain an uneasy peace, reaching out occasionally, but never quite addressing the core issues. James sends me updates about the kids every few months, brief notes about report cards and basketball games that let me know they're okay without requiring a response. I don't know what the future holds for my family. I don't know if Ashley will ever soften enough to have a real conversation with me. I don't know if my parents will ever fully understand why I did what I did. I don't know if those kids will grow up believing their aunt abandoned them or if they'll eventually learn the truth. What I do know is that I made the right choice. For years, I allowed myself to be used because I confused obligation with love and generosity with self-worth. I thought that if I gave enough, helped enough, sacrificed enough, I would finally earn the love and respect I craved from my family. Instead, I just taught them that my boundaries didn't matter and my feelings were negotiable. Canceling that trip was the most expensive thing I've ever done. It was also the most valuable. If you're hearing this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're the family member who always gives while everyone else takes, if you've been guilted into believing that your needs matter less than everyone else's, I want you to know something important. You deserve better. You deserve to be appreciated, not exploited. You deserve relationships built on mutual respect, not one-sided obligation. Setting boundaries might cost you money. It might cost you relationships. It might cost you the illusion of family harmony that you've been desperately maintaining for years. But what you'll gain in return is something no amount of money can buy. You'll gain yourself. And that, I promise you, is worth it. What would you have done if you were in my shoes?